podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon, and I am a relationship expert, international speaker, and best-selling author of a book, Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the TV or the news on social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of things that don't really exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today, we are going to talk about divorce, but also about domestic abuse. And we have someone who specialises in that, Samantha Collins. Hi, Samantha.
Hi, Sophie.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thanks. So can you tell us a bit more about yourself, please?
So I'm a senior solicitor at Eric Robinson Solicitors. We are a local firm. I'm based in the Winchester office, but we have offices in many different locations. We have offices in Lymington, Richmond, Basingstoke, Bracknell, Bitton, Hedge End, and a new office opening in Hedge End as well, dealing with our commercial work. But I myself am based in the Winchester office. On a personal level, I'm also a mum of two very young and beautiful children that keep me busy outside of work. I've been qualified for 11 years dealing with family matters, and been dealing with family matters as well in my training contract. So I've been addressing and advising clients in this area of law for almost 13 years now.
Fair enough. So you obviously deal with many aspects of relationship breakdowns, but can you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, so family law is all encompassing. So as the title suggests, we deal with all types of family matters. So we could be dealing with a divorce or indeed a civil partnership breakdown, cohabitant disputes, financial matters stemming from any of those forms of relationship. But also we deal with children matters. So if there are any issues with regards to contact between a parent and their child, and also grandparents, that's something that I'm quite keen to promote at the moment as well, is putting some more information out there about grandparents' rights. In addition to that, and something which I've specialised in and developed a niche in over the years that I've been qualified, is domestic abuse, and applying that obviously to the other areas that we deal with. So there's never a dull day. It always is very different. And that's one of the things that appeals to me, is that you get to advise people on all different areas of law.
Yeah, and I actually, you know, when you touched about the grandparent right, I think indeed, I mean, I know quite a few people where the marriage broke down or whatever, and the grandparents can't see their grandkids, and they're actually quite destroyed by that, in effect. And I think that, especially for a child, it's not healthy either. It doesn't teach them, you know.
No, it's actually becoming an increasing problem as well. And in this day and age, grandparents are becoming an even more important role, especially with working families, and grandparents are assisting in childcare, where there are great problems around the cost of childcare for working families. So grandparents are becoming even more involved on a day-to-day care basis. But in any event, even grandparents that would see their children on grandchildren on a regular basis, but not necessarily caring for them. Obviously, when there is a relationship breakdown, it is very difficult, because unfortunately there could then be a breakdown in the relationship between them and the other parent. So we've actually recently signed up to Grandparents Plus, which is a website which is designed to guide grandparents with their rights in respect of contact with their grandchildren. And it's something that we're very keen to promote, and try to explain to grandparents what their rights are, because they do have rights. It might be slightly more complicated in terms of a procedure than a parent seeking contact, but it is certainly something that grandparents need to become more aware of.
And often when people, think of getting divorced or splitting up, they think about the financial side, they think about the legalities that go with it, but they don't always think about the emotional side of things. What other things do you think they should take into account when they're deciding to split up?
Well, I think first and foremost, obviously, we're here to give legal advice. So that's our priority in terms of ensuring that every client goes away with accurate legal advice dependent upon their situation. And each case is indeed case specific. So we are looking at the legalities of the separation, but certainly from my point of view, I like to look at it from a more holistic approach. Obviously, that's not always appropriate, and we're always client-led in terms of what our instructions are. But I think it is very important to look at all aspects. And certainly the first question that I always ask my clients in an interview is whether there is any possibility of a reconciliation. Yeah. What are the scope? What scope is there for that? And is that something that they want to consider? Do they want to consider going to any counselling, etc., or have they reached the point really where they feel that their marriage has irretrievably broken down, or indeed their relationship? And I think not only from the legal side of things, in terms of formalising a separation, but other things that from the emotional side is that people are very worried about their homes and what they will be doing financially, where they stand. So over my years of experience, I've obviously come into contact with many different cases, and I have developed relationships with other organisations. So I feel that I'm in a very good position to look at the overall picture for the client. Once I've obviously given them the appropriate advice in terms of their legal stance, then I look at things such as obtaining financial advice, whether they need tax advice, but also whether they need any assistance in terms of how they're dealing with things emotionally, if there's anyone that I can refer who I've heard from other clients who have helped them. Or indeed, as I've said, I have specialised in domestic abuse cases for many years. And so on speaking to clients, quite often I am able to point them in the direction of some projects or programs or counselling or other assistance that might help them, even to smaller things such as contacting local organisations who can ensure that their property is properly safeguarded and that there are safety measures in place, and indeed whether children need any assistance in dealing with the separation and change in circumstances. So I do try to look at the overall picture, while obviously first and foremost giving the accurate and appropriate and the best legal advice possible.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned pensions, and I know that certainly I've heard many times it's actually the one thing that sometimes stops people from wanting to split up, that they don't want to share the pension. Is that a myth or is that true?
I think pensions are actually a sensitive issue generally. I mean, nobody really wants to part with any money, let alone their pensions. But it is a factor that gets taken into consideration. I think as soon as somebody seeks legal advice, they're aware that of all the things that need to go into the matrimonial pots when dividing up finances. And pensions is one of those considerations. Obviously, there are, a number of legal issues and points that need to be looked at when looking at any division of a pension and whether it would be appropriate depending on the client's circumstances. But it is certainly something that people are reluctant to part with money generally, I think. But then you do get cases where people are actually relatively amicable, and there is much more of a move towards looking at mediation, collaborative law, and also arbitration, and trying to keep matters out of the court. So there have been significant moves in the time that I've certainly been practicing to try to get people to try and approach things on a more amicable basis.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, so you've been also talking quite a bit about domestic abuse. Now, quite surprisingly, this often happens in couples that actually have a fairly wealthy background. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of stigma attached to domestic abuse generally. Domestic abuse is not only violence, it can be emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse. And there are many cases in wealthier families that, in particular, financial, psychological and emotional are more prevalent than physical, although that doesn't say that there's not physical abuse as well. But certainly emotional, psychological and financial is not always easy to identify, even for the survivor of the situation, even how to prove it. So it is very difficult. And actually sometimes clients come in and to see me and they don't necessarily identify that they are suffering from any form of abuse. It's just how the relationship has been. So it's breaking down those barriers and trying to make it more accessible for people to be able to discuss those issues and to seek help and assistance and support following on from a relationship where there has been abuse.
And do you have any sort of like, I'm not going to say guidelines, it's not quite the right term, but how could someone maybe recognise that there are issues of that nature in the relationship?
It is very difficult, and I think that the first thing is to speak out, really, and to speak to family and friends, and to try and speak about any concerns that you have. And there are lots of websites such as Women's Aid that do good. Provide good information, on information with regards to domestic abuse. So if anyone does have concerns, maybe just to do some general research, but really to speak to family and friends. Yeah, research. But also with many of these sites, you can actually remove it from your search history. So there are ways that you can cover your tracks. So people should be aware that researching it, if you go onto appropriate websites, then there are ways of ensuring that cannot be traced. And that's really important, I think, to point out, because a lot of people are very fearful of even trying to get information about it. But if you go onto the appropriate sites, then it's certainly something that can be covered, and so that you're not worried about it being popping up in any search history.
And do you have any case studies that you could share with us?
I think it's difficult to sort of be too specific. Obviously, I've dealt with many cases over the years, and also each case is specific to a client, and I certainly wouldn't want to breach any client confidentiality that in speaking about clients. But I think that everyone's case and situation is different. We are all different. We're different people, and we're coming from different backgrounds, and also with different scenarios and situations in life. And I think it's very important that, especially from my point of view and from giving legal advice, that you take that on board and you're very much guided by your client and their circumstances and what they feel comfortable with. And so every case is very different, and I'm very much guided by my client on that basis.
Fair enough. And do you find that sometimes people are a bit, I'm not going to say wary, I don't mean wary in the scared, frightened of coming to see you for the first time? Are they worried that it's going to make everything final and that they're not sure? What do you find?
Yeah, we do. I mean, a lot of people come in and they're extremely nervous, and also when they come in for the initial appointments, then it is sort of a bit like information overload, because there is a lot of information that we do have to go through. I mean, one of the things that we offer as a firm is an initial fixed fee interview, which also covers a follow-up email with an attendance note, which confirms all our advice to that client, so they can go away and actually read through it over a cup of tea away from the meeting, because it is very difficult to start opening up to somebody that you've only just met about obviously issues in a relationship and that are personal to you. But I think certainly with my years of experience, I certainly hope I wouldn't be frightening, and that I make people feel comfortable, that they can come in, and I do hope that I do make them feel comfortable and able to engage and open up to me, because obviously we need to establish a good client solicitor relationship, and the client needs to feel able to open up and explain everything to me. And certainly I feel that that's what I'm extremely successful in doing. And then we can get the right plan of action moving forward. And I think actually many clients, when they come away, it's actually being empowered with knowledge, and that fear of not knowing actually is the worst thing. And once they go away and actually know where they stand and what the options are available to them, then they actually end up feeling, much better moving forward and on leaving the meeting.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit like, when you're ill and you Google your symptoms and you end up with the worst things ever. There's a lot of myth and information that can be taken kind of in the wrong way when you just search on the internet. And what sort of, what sort of information should they bring to you for a first meeting?
So for the first meeting, we obviously, over the years that I've been practicing, then we've developed sort of a structure to that initial meeting, because we want to ensure that we get all of the key information that we need in order to be able to advise fully and get, as I said, the plan of action moving forward. So initially, we don't generally advise the client that they would need to bring anything to the meeting with us. But we would say, obviously, to think about what it is that you need advice on. And some clients do indeed write questions that they would like to ask, specific questions. Obviously, we cover as much as we can in the initial meeting, and indeed address all of the points that are key to that client's circumstances. But yeah, we would say if you wanted to bring a list of questions that are specific, we'd hope that we've already covered them by the end of the meeting. But obviously, if there are any issues that specifically need to be raised, then they can do that. If they do want to come in to see us about divorce and they're ready to get going, then the marriage certificate is something that they would need to bring. And sadly, in this day and age with GDPR and money laundering, etc., we do have to have ID, etc. So we have to go through various documents, practical documents that they need to bring in. But certainly the first initial appointment would be to ascertain all of the client's circumstances. So there's not anything specific they would need to bring with them.
And in terms of, just say, someone wants to get divorced, but the other party is not willing at all. What happens then? Is it just a case of a very long, difficult procedure? It
is more complicated, I'm not going to lie. Obviously, if somebody isn't wanting to engage, then there is more paperwork that's required than if it is a straightforward, amicable scenario. However, somebody won't be hindered from being divorced because the other person isn't cooperating, because otherwise many people would stay married.
Fair enough.
So there are processes in place, but yes, unfortunately, it can sometimes take longer than if it is an amicable situation and the other party is willing to engage. So that's what we would always hope for. We are also a part of Resolution, which is a group of family lawyers, and so we do always encourage amicable behaviours in any proceedings, in any event, and that's part of the code of conduct that we all sign up for. So we do try to get things to move forward as smoothly as possible.
Fair enough. And do you think that people enter marriage a bit too lightly sometimes and not understand the consequences?
I think everything is personal to that one person, and certainly from a solicitor's point of view, we're not here to judge people in any way. People get married for all sorts of reasons, and people go through different experiences in different times of their lives. But certainly there has been a lot in the media about divorce and as you refer to, people entering into it too lightly and perhaps exiting it too lightly. But we have to remain non-judgmental and deal with a client on the basis of how they come to us, because everyone's different, aren't they?
Yeah, completely. And I think that's also why there's a lot more cohabitation going on nowadays, which is also something that they don't always think they should go and see a solicitor for, but actually they should deal with.
Yes, and cohabitation is potentially even a more complicated area of law. It's not sort of governed by the Matrimonial Causes Act. So there are a number of complications for cohabitants, and indeed there's a lot in the press at the moment about same-sex couples being able to enter civil partnerships. So the law is ever evolving, and hopefully there will be the opportunities available to everybody out there. But, you know, certainly in terms of cohabitants marriage, it comes all with, unfortunately, difficulties when there is a breakdown.
Yeah. And in the UK, anyway, they are looking to, I can't think of the word, remove blame, is it? Because at the moment, there's 5 different reasons why you can get divorced, if you can tell us what they are, and then what they're looking at.
Sorry to cut over you there.
That's all right.
There is a huge amount of publicity at the moment about no-fault divorce. Now, essentially, there is only one ground for divorce, and that is that your marriage has irretrievably broken down, but it can be proven in different ways. Mm-hmm. And what the campaign is about, and certainly we have been promoting that as a firm, is that there be the introduction of a no-fault divorce, so that people would not need to wait 2 years with the consent of the other person, or if that person isn't willing to give the consent. Otherwise, people need to proceed on the basis of unreasonable behaviour, and sometimes that can antagonise an already very emotionally charged situation, and leads to allegations being placed and put to each party when neither really want to do that, and actually they just want to proceed with an amicable divorce. So certainly it's something that I would promote. Yeah, indeed, and to try to keep things as amicable as possible, especially where there's children involved. So it's certainly something that I, as a solicitor, am keen to promote, and also as a firm that we're very much supporting the no-fault divorce, so that if people have reached that decision in their relationship, again, everyone's relationship is different, and if that's what they have decided is the best way forward for them, that they should be given the opportunity to do it without entering into essentially a slanging match.
Yeah. And so can they enter a no-fault divorce now, or is it something that is being looked at?
It's something that's being looked at the moment. So unfortunately, it's not something that's available at the moment, but hopefully there will be progress in the next and coming years. Yeah,
because it is, if you don't split up politely, normally you have been going through stuff for a while before you reach that point anyway. So to then have to wait another 2 years, must be quite difficult. I've never been married, I've never been divorced, but I can only imagine that in terms of moving on yourself, it must be quite difficult.
Yeah, obviously you could proceed on the basis of unreasonable behaviour. So you could cite examples of the other person's unreasonable behaviour, but some people don't want to do that. And actually, then they get to the point of 2 years separation with consent, and actually the other person is then not consenting. So that's sort of wherein lies the problem. If somebody can't find examples of unreasonable behaviour, and the other person is not going to consent at the 2 year stage, then you're sort of at stalemate, and there's no way to proceed with the divorce. So hopefully this no-fault divorce will address some of those issues and enable people to proceed without antagonising a very difficult position, but also enable them to move on with their lives.
And what would be unreasonable behaviour?
So unreasonable behaviour is very subjective, but you do have to have examples which would satisfy a judge. We would normally say that you need to have 4 to 6 examples, and sometimes in an initial meeting, then clients do find it difficult sometimes. Sometimes they find it very easy, in fact, but sometimes they do find it difficult to think of that, and we say for them to go away and have a cup of tea and email them into us. But But it is subjective, and we are obviously trained so that we, once we receive them through, then we are able to look at them and see whether they need to be adapted or whether we need further information, etc., which we can revert back to our client for.
Fair enough. And obviously, whilst it's a very personal thing, do you think people should remain married even when the relationship isn't working anymore?
I think it is very personal, and everybody, as I've said, it is different. And some people are quite happy to remain married. More often than not, we do find it when children are involved, that they don't necessarily have any particular rush to end that legal relationship between them. But some people see it essentially as a piece of paper. Some people take it more seriously. So I think it is very personal to each individual, and the law does need to reflect the change in climate and the change in people's views in that regard. Yeah.
And to wrap this up, really, what sort of advice would you give someone who is just like not very happy and just thinking about, I don't think this is going to pan out the way I intended? What advice would you give them?
I think talk to family and friends first, obviously. Talk to people that you can confide in about your situation. But if you are thinking about moving forward with a separation, then it's always a good idea to get some legal advice. Then you know where you stand in terms of the things that are most important to you. So the first, obviously, being children, if there are any, and then looking at the family home and where you're living and your financial circumstances. So at least there can be a planned approach, and taking all of those factors into consideration so that you're prepared for when it does happen and you have reached the decision that you do want to proceed and move forward. But sort of at that stage, knowledge is probably power. So I would say that knowing where you stand is probably the most important thing moving forward.
Yeah, and I agree, because as I said, just trying to find out for yourself is not really going to leave you with the right information, or could be subject to, explanations or just variations, really. Well, Sam,
exactly. I would always say get professional advice.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's it for today. So thank you. And if you've enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, and more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie.